guys, it's Abby and welcome back to my channel. Yes, I look exactly the same as my last video because I'm filming these on the same day to try and, get them out there. So as you probably see from the title, I'm going to be talking about how I prepared for my UCAT, UKCAT, whatever you're calling it. Okay, so the first thing I would say, make sure if your uni needs it, which I feel like for the majority of you will probably need to do the test, because the alternative is BMAT, where I know Oxbridge look at BMAT, UCL look at BMAT, I think Imperial maybe, and Keele, and a couple of others that I'm definitely forgetting. But there are so many more UCAT universities than BMAT, so if you're unsure about which university to go to still, definitely prepare for your UCAT still, because chances are at least one of the universities will look at that. So first I'll tell you how I prepared, and then I'll get into all of my tips and go into more depth. A few months before, I got my resources, got the books, and when I say books, I only got one book. I got this one, which I feel like most people have. You can find it on Amazon, eBay, secondhand, pretty cheap. You really don't need to buy it new. It's really not a necessity to have like a shiny new book, just something to look at, because this is a really good one. It has, as the name has, a lot of practice questions for each section, and it also has at the start of each section it has an introduction. It tells you what the format of that section is, what the purpose of it is. There's 5 sections, and only the last one is based on putting it in a clinical context. So the rest of them are kind of just random skills they're testing. So if you don't know what they're looking for from you, then it'll be really hard about knowing how to approach the questions. So the little introductions at the start of each section, and different approaches to the questions really helped me right at the beginning, because this was a very new concept to me. I would say a long time before your exam, read through it so you kind of have the gist of how things are, do a couple practice questions here and there, But for me, I didn't really start properly grinding UCAT until 2-3 weeks before. So I'd probably say 90% of my preparation within 2 weeks, and I still got alright marks.
Boy, if you don't get...
So in those 2 weeks preparation, I used a different resource called Mannafire, which is a website that you do need to pay for, so they would vary depending on financial situation on whether you would be able to do that. Well, I got the 2-week package, which was £25, and I even split it with my friend, which I'm not sure if you're meant to do, but we both used half of the resources, and that was definitely enough for me for 2 weeks. So if you got the 2-week package, then you would have more than enough resources to use for those 2 weeks, and they have timed full papers, timed sections, and loads of practice questions as well, like more than you can ever finish really, unless you start really early. They also have 1 month packages, I think 3 and 6 months, but I'm not quite sure. But they have quite a lot if you want to start earlier. But that would be a really good one to use, and I would recommend it, because since the actual UCAT is online, it has the same layout on the screen, and it has the same, pretty much everything. It's exactly the same as your real exam. So that was really good towards the end, so I can see how fast I would need to do the sections, how the difficulty of the questions vary as you go through the section, things like that. So yeah. The next thing I would say is book your date early if possible. So during 2020, I don't know how this is gonna work, because obviously coronavirus, driving theory tests and driving practical tests have all been cancelled, and for me it was in the same location. And I just looked online right now, and it said stuff like the date is to be released on when you can start booking. Yeah, as soon as the bookings come out, try get on and book the date you want really early, because for me, I wanted to do a couple of days before I did mine at the start of August, but since all of the slots were selling out, I had to just make do with what they gave me. even though I booked like 2 days after the dates all came out. So towards the start of your preparation, do untimed practice until you get familiar with the format of the questions, especially with things like decision making. They always have, obviously the numbers are always different, situations are always slightly different, but they always have the same type of questions. So if you can kind of get used to that, and even if you're getting question wrong, when you look in the answers, you'll see how they wanted you to answer it, and that will help make you better. So if you start doing untimed practice and just seeing if you can do the questions, and if you can get into the mindset of doing those questions, even situational judgment, to get into the mindset of being a doctor, you're a junior doctor, you're a medical student, all of these situations they'll give you, if you can try to get into that mindset earlier, then when you get into a timed environment, when you start doing timed practice, it becomes so much easier rather than pushing yourself to do timed from the start. Make sure you understand the format of the test. So I'll try to explain a bit now. But there are 5 sections. You have a program, so you sat at the computer and you can start whenever you want. You can take your deep breaths, have a sip of your water, and you have a whiteboard with you as well, and a marker. Just make sure you know what everything is. You're calm. You're as calm as you can be, and you're kind of settled before you start. For each section, you have a time limit, and the timer will be in the top corner. So kind of keep your eye on the timer, even though it is kind of stressful to see the time all the time. Make sure you keep checking up on yourself, because there's always the same amount of questions in, for example, a quantitative section. I think there's 36 maybe. I'm just thinking of this on the top of my head. But if you know there's always 36 in the section and it's halfway through and you're only on question 5, you know you need to pick up the pace, you know? When it gets close to the end of each section time, for me, my marker was 30 seconds. When I got to 30 seconds left on the timer, go through the rest of the questions. Since they're multiple choice, randomly guess. Because you have, I think it goes up to E, so you have a 1 in 5 chance of getting it right. Even, like, honestly, guessing is always better than leaving it blank, because you can pick up 1-2 extra marks that can bump up your grade a bit. Also, in terms of marking, that's also something you definitely need to look at. You get a raw mark, which is translated into that scale from, I think, 300 to 900. And when you finish, you get a sheet of paper with your each section mark and your final grade. If you look online, you can find different methods to try and estimate your grade for that section. And if you use Mannafire, it will automatically do it for you. And obviously their estimates, we don't know how they really work out the grade. So that's just what people have kind of guessed on how they've done it. And when I worked out my own grade and when I used Mannafire, I actually ended up being quite disappointed with the marks I was getting. But when it came out of the real thing, I got so much better. So I don't know if that was due to the way they were working it out or if I just performed better under pressure. But just bear in mind that they're not exactly accurate, so always go into the exam optimistic. So if you're using a resource like a book or Mannafire, you have a set amount of timed exam type questions you can do. I would say plan your prep. For example, if you have 8 full papers and you have 16 days until your test, do 1 every 2 days. Don't bang them all out at the start and then find yourself feeling unprepared closer to the time, because you just want to make sure you're keeping it consistent with your work rate. And this also ensures you make the most use of your resources, because if you were kind of trying to save your questions and so you didn't really do anything at the start and at the end you find yourself with way too much to do, then you might have not ended up completing as much of the book or of the resource online as you could have. So just kind of make sure you use the most of what you have, especially if you paid for it. Just make sure you get the most of your money, really. On the day, don't overdo the preparation, because if you've been doing well up until then, or regardless of how you've been doing up until then, if you don't get the grade you're hoping for on the day, that can really kind of psych you out for the exam. You do a bit of gentle reading of the book. At the back, they have, with the answers, the explanations of why that answer was right, especially for situational judgment. kind of read those, make sure you understand why each question was that way. Okay, so that was my kind of general advice. So now for specific sections. For most of the sections, like for me, quantitative, verbal reasoning, and decision making, I would say there wasn't really a trick, it was just practice. Because especially for decision making, there's only so many different ways they can ask you a question. So if you know the different formats of question that they're going to ask, it gets a lot easier to practice, get used to it, know what you're looking for. For quantitative, don't underestimate it. So for me, as I do maths as one of my A levels, and I've always been good at maths for GCSE, I know it's not meant to be harder than GCSE level, which I don't think it is. It's just the fact of you have a lot of questions to do in a very small amount of time. So even if you can complete all the questions, you can find yourself getting a mark lower than you would have if you time managed effectively. So for that one, I would say maybe start doing timed practices earlier, just so you get used to trying to do as many questions as you can. And that's the one for me where I would guess the most at the end, because I would not complete the section. I don't think ever I've completed a quantitative section in the time they've given. Abstract reasoning. I'm laughing because that is a section that messed me up the most. That's the one that I found the hardest. And I think it turned out that I didn't actually do the worst in abstract reasoning. I found abstract so hard because apparently it's similar to if you had to do an entrance exam to get into year 7. Apparently it's kind of similar to that, but a bit harder. But I didn't even do that for my school, so I didn't have that experience. So what I did in order to spot the patterns easier was I wrote a list, if I can find it. This is my UCAT practice notebook. I have all of my early practice in here, if you can see all of the crosses. I've got my abstract reasoning pattern list. So I feel like I did this pretty late, to be honest. It might have been even a week or a few days before my test, which I probably should have done a bit earlier to help me practice more. But I will go through the answers, or as I was doing the questions online, they would always give you an explanation of what the pattern was, what you were looking for, and what the odd one out was, or what was the next in the sequence, for example. So I would write down every single pattern that I would see. But yeah, I did double page worth of all the patterns I could see in my abstract to see what kind of patterns they had. Because some of them, as I would look at the answers, I just found it so strange. I was like, how could you see that? All triangles are right angled, the number of squares equals the number of triangles. Just little notes to help myself before the exam, kind of read through and see, okay, these are the kind of things I need to look out for, just in case one of the patterns is similar to one of the ones I've seen before. I feel like writing that list definitely helped me improve my grade on that a lot more than if I didn't, so that could be something to think about. Situational judgment has always been my favourite, because I was like, yes, this is a section that relates to medicine. This is a thing that will, like, you know, help me. Oh my life, I think my camera's running out. Let's see how far we can get. I was like, this is a thing that can help me see what med school is going to be like, see what being a doctor is going to be like. So I always practice the most for situational judgment, and I did very well in this. The way they grade situational judgment is different from every other section. So band 1 is the top and band 4 is the bottom. So I got band 1 in situational judgment, and yeah, I enjoyed it the most. So I would say the most important things to consider when thinking about situational judgment questions would be the 4 pillars, which is autonomy. This is testing me now. Autonomy, justice, beneficence, and maleficence, however you say that word. Yeah. So research what they are, get to know what they are, get to know what their principles kind of mean in practice. Confidentiality, yes, confidentiality is very important. Patient confidentiality will always be one of the top of the list. Patient safety will always be one of the top of the list. And situations with consent, if a patient is under 18 or if they have a medical condition, which means that they cannot make their own informed decisions. So situations with that will always kind of vary from the classical autonomy answer, you know. I've got a few kind of common situations that come up and what the normal answer for them is. Obviously, this will vary. Use your common sense when you're thinking of them. So if you as a med student or a junior doctor make a mistake, the answer will never be a very appropriate thing to do unless an apology is stated. So for the appropriate questions, there will be a very appropriate thing to do, appropriate, not appropriate but not awful, and a very inappropriate thing to do. For most of them, you can kind of guess if they're vaguely appropriate or vaguely inappropriate, but deciding between the minor and the extreme is what's most difficult. You make a mistake and you're talking to the patient. If the statement you're saying to the patient doesn't include an apology, most of the time it's not going to be a very appropriate thing to do. It will be the minor one. Anything involving a lie, even if it's to make the patient feel better, is generally inappropriate because that doesn't show integrity as a doctor. If any altercations or issues with another classmate or workmate are mentioned, the most appropriate response is to always talk to them privately before bringing it up to a supervisor. So kind of think about that. And anything regarding patient safety, always very appropriate. The patient is the centre of everything you do as a doctor, so keep that in mind. Yeah, I think that is all the tips I have for today. But yeah, thanks for listening. Good luck for all of your tests. Let me know what's going on with them if you know, because I'm actually really curious, like, when are they gonna happen? When can you book it? Actually, just let me know if you know. If you do your exam, let me know how it goes. Keep me updated. Yeah, thanks for listening, guys. Stay safe and see you in my next video.